So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. This is How to Filipino by Proyekto Pilipino. So it's part of the Proyekto Pilipino podcast, and I'm the host, Leloy Claudio. And this is a new podcast that we're hosting under the ambit, of course, of the broader Proyekto Pilipino project, which includes a wonderful podcast by Manolo Quezon, and of course, our main show that's about to come out, the rebooted Why Speak. This is going to be the more quiet part of our network of shows because it's going to be extremely reflective. It's still a civic show, but it's going to be reflective in the sense that I'm going to talk to people who have a civic life, and then I'm going to ask them about their origin stories. So you know how superhero movies, the first episode is always how they became Superman, how they became Batman, right? And so for this podcast, I'm going to talk to people who I believe have a strong commitment to civics in the Philippines, and I'm going to ask them how they became themselves. And so we're doing our first few guests, and as I was thinking about who should be one of my first few guests, I thought about my very, very dear friend, Richard Heydarian, who has a very, very active civic life. You know him, of course, for his podcast, Deep Dive, which is the number one political podcast in the Philippines. So I really don't have to explain why this guy has much of a civic life. But beyond being a podcaster, of course, Richard appears on CNN, he appears on BBC, he appears on Al Jazeera. He's just the most prominent commentator on Philippine politics. Like him or love him, that's who Richard is. He's the most prominent commentator on Philippine politics globally. So welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you. I'm glad there was no
Yeah.
Trumpian the most. I got worried for a second. Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you, Leloy. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be nervous about this discussion because I take my civic duties seriously, but not myself that
Yeah,
seriously.
I
So maybe
know.
I'll try to make take myself a bit more seriously today for the sake of this show.
I know it's very hard to make Richard feel uncomfortable in a public setting, but what people don't know is that Richard is actually a very private person, and this is, I think, the first time he's going to do a podcast where he talks about his biography, right, Richard? You've never really talked about your life story, your origin story before.
Yeah, to a certain degree, yeah. I'm quite a private person. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So where do you want to start? What is your foundational memory as a child? What's the first thing you remember about civic life as a child?
Well, actually, my very first memory, I think, has implications for governance and public policy because it was a very traumatic experience. I was a toddler and there was the earthquake in Baguio. So I was born in Baguio City. This is a city that kind of served as a R&R for the American imperial forces, basically during the American colonization of the Philippines. The climate is quite different. It's subtropical. It's all the pines and the misting. It's a very kind of a different society, which I'll discuss later on, because my experience as a Baguio boy always informed my ideas about what is a much more egalitarian, quote
Mm.
unquote, middle class, democratic, pluralistic society. And I'm very proud that my hometown, for all its imperfection, we can easily talk about that, is one of the few major cities in the Philippines that is not dominated by a political dynasty. So I think we can go back to that. So my very first memory, and actually, physiological, this should not be the case unless it's very traumatic, is the earthquake in 1990. So I was like, what,
How old
barely
were
three
you?
years old? I was
Wow. Okay.
barely 3 years old, man. So I was a toddler, but I remember it very well. For days we had to sleep under starry skies. Uh, I remember the first few hours when my dad had to carry me and my sister to the outside because the shaking was terrible, and I had this feeling of something really is going wrong, and I was like wondering where's my mom, where's our family. So I was immediately with my sister, and that was a very traumatic experience. And for days we had to sleep outside in the yard under the sky. It was actually quite cold, but very beautiful starry nights. Those are my very, very few first memories. And we can discuss that later on because that earthquake would have very long-term implications also for urban planning and governance in the Philippines, particularly in Baguio, I'm sorry. But it also had a big impression on me. So unfortunately, it was a very traumatic experience that killed hundreds of people, if not thousands of
Mm.
people in Baguio. That is my very first memory. Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about your family, Richard. What kind of family did you grow up around?
Yeah, so I come from a very typical like Baguio middle class family. My dad is from the medical field. My mom is from the educational field. I disappointed both my parents because I neither became a doctor nor a lawyer. But in some ways, I'm probably overcompensating through my intellectual and civic contribution. It's a very kind of a multicultural background, as you can see from my family name, from my weird accent, from my sense of connection to many culture, or whether it's culture from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Philippines, among others. As you can see, I'm a very private person. I don't talk much about
Mm.
my past, but what I can say is that it was a very typical middle class ethos that shaped my childhood. I remember one of the first good conversations I had, which had big effect on me morally, was when my sister told me, whenever you talk to people from more humble backgrounds, remember that this person maybe would have had a 10 times better life than you if not for certain circumstances. It's kind of like that opening line in The Great Gatsby when the dad advises the narrator, basically saying not everyone had the privilege of going to Princeton or something along those lines. So we had very strong ethos. I was, I think, almost literally born in Marcos Highway as my mom was giving me birth to me.
Really?
Uh, on the way to the hospital, I think I raised this even in an interview with Christian Amanpour, right? Like I was literally almost born in Marcos Highway in Baguio. But one of the things I'm also very proud of, at least my immediate family, to be very clear about it, is, we never fell for this Ilocano Baguio fascination or nostalgia for the Marcos era. Because I think
Hmm.
empirically speaking, you can already see there's the civic part coming in.
Yes. Yeah.
I grew up really in an environment whereby Marcos was everything. Like Marcos was a great. I mean, I can imagine probably in certain regions in Spain, that's how they talk about General Franco, right? You
Mhm.
could see similar, like this middle class, educated lawyer, doctor, middle class people saying all of this. Oh, during Marcos we had this and that, and the reality is that there are many good infrastructure projects from the Marcos era in
Mhm.
our region because he preferentially treated us, including, of course, the Marcos Highway, among other things. So one of the things I'm very proud about is that my parents from very early on gave me like the like kind of rough texture of reality. Like my mom and dad would talk about, poverty during the Marcos dictatorship era, even in Baguio, which was supposed to be one of the more privileged areas. So they disabused me of all of this nonsense propaganda or the cult of personality about the Marcoses and the golden era. Wala kaming ganun. So I was very lucky to have very politically literate parents, even if my parents were very conscious not to get involved in politics. And in a way, I think I really disappointed them because the last thing they wanted me to be involved in was politics. And for some reason, reverse psychology siguro sa akin.
So they were not a political family. They were not very political parents, and neither was your sister, but there were values. What kind of values were you raised to believe in? What did you prioritize as a kid?
Yeah, so that's a very good observation, right? So, like, my parents were very skeptical of politics and politicians, but they were very clear about political values. Do not support tyranny. Do not support human rights violations. Do not fall for what we call budol, right? Or demagoguery, right? Or this demagogic populist figure. Those things were instilled in me. Also, this very strong spirit of egalitarianism, as I mentioned, my sister, who's a dentist doctor, I was supposed to follow in her footsteps, and I also failed along those lines. So they're your typical professional middle class, petty bourgeois family, who also had this very strong sense of egalitarianism, of civic duty, but not in terms of direct participation in politics, but more like conscientious voting or at least conscientious memorialization of history, including I remember my dad and mom also telling me about some of the crazy things they remember from the Marcos dictatorship era. So I never had any illusions about the so-called golden era, and that immunized me from the kind of the political zeitgeist and atmosphere that you still have in northern parts of the Philippines where the Marcoses remain extremely popular. So I feel very, very lucky. Another thing I also remember is that I come from a middle class family. So, when my dad got sick, he had brain tumor and all. We had to spend a lot. I mean, welfare programs are not very good in the Philippines. So, we were slightly déclassé. So, we went from an upper middle income, upper middle income. So, we went from upper middle class family sometimes to a bit almost lower middle class. There was a time of very difficult transition and all of that. So one of the awkward things about that was we still kept our friends, including some of the friends who were wealthier than us, and suddenly the gap became even bigger at some points. Like I would remember at some point in time. I mean, eventually, of course, things evened out, but one of the things I loved is that my family instilled me in this sense of never allow anyone to intimidate you.
Mm.
So as you can see, Lelo, no one
Yeah.
intimidates me.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
from Henry Kissinger to Duterte, like all sorts of characters I've dealt with later on in my life, no one intimidated me because from very early
To
on,
mainstream Filipino economists who don't intimidate you
exactly.
either with their graphs and their fancy technicians magic.
Now you're bringing your own biography, but no, but so I was saying like one of the things I was taught was like no one is better than you, but you're also not better than anyone inherently.
Mm.
That's what I loved about it. So it's
Mm.
very hard to intimidate me, but it's at the same time, it's very hard for me to convince that I'm so much better than others, even though it comes off differently on the surface. But I don't take myself
Oh,
seriously
yeah.
because I know inherently I'm just like anyone else. So I'm very lucky about that. I would also say one of the things I'm very, very lucky for is having grandparents who also instilled very
Yeah.
strong sense of, like personal grittiness. And especially my grandma, from my mom's side, who was this this typical uh, Chinese Ilocano, like vegan background, so best of all worlds, right? Like
When
hardworking.
he says vegan, he doesn't mean like she didn't eat meat. He's saying she was from vegan,
Oh yeah,
VIGAN.
vegan.
Yes.
So yeah, so vegan was VI, right?
Yeah.
VIGAN is this kind of it was one of the major hubs for the galleon trade, which as Lelo you correctly pointed out via some of the scholarly work, it was basically one of the hubs for the first instance of proper globalization, right? So from Acapulco, from Mexico, thing. So until
A
today, if
real
you go to
hub of gentility, that city. Yeah.
absolutely. And you see a lot of merchants from Chinese background there, also people from Hispanic background. So with my grandma, God bless her soul, we just lost her the other year, but I feel
Yeah.
she's still there. She also instilled me in this sense of, this grittiness. I could see her walking down to the mayor of the city, including the current mayor, the other saying, "Why didn't you attend my granddaughter's wedding?" And then like the mayor had to say, "Oh, I had to meet this oligarch or that oligarch, but I attended your other because like there were like 2 days back to back, two different grandchildren, my cousins getting wedding, but the mayor only could make it to one. And then my grandmother was reprimanding the good mayor. I felt bad for Mayor Magalog. So I won't say she was bully, God bless her soul, but she was really a force of nature. So I saw someone who way into her 80s who was just basically gangster. I mean, like like whenever I read about these stories about very strong spirited grandmas, I mean I immediately can relate to my grandmother. And I remember one day it was a gathering of I and my cousins. I know Lelo, I'm a
Yeah.
kind of a sometimes I feel you feel I'm like a domineering character. But you shouldn't blame me because also I grew up in an environment of being surrounded by literally all big boys. So all my cousins are either taller than me or like bigger bodied than me, right?
I've seen
So
some of the pictures. Yeah, I've seen some
yeah,
of the
it's like
picture.
one
I
is
know
in
what you mean. Yeah.
Ibiza, like
Yeah.
the other ones, they're all basketball players. I mean, imagine my cousins some of them could dunk with two hands. So
Mm.
that gives you a sense of athleticism. So I kind of compensated. We can discuss that by going into martial arts, etc.
Yeah.
But I was always surrounded by these big boys. And I have another cousin from Norway he came back even bigger body, and I remember one day my grandma was like looking at all of us like these four big boys next to each other. I was also going to gym during that time, big bicep, and she said, "All of you came from me," like in a very like Tony, all of you came from me. So she was like this
She
kind of gangster grandma. I
She
love her.
reminds me of the Italian grandmothers who would feed her grandchildren like hulking meatballs and various like big pots of pasta with like with massive hunks of meat inside.
I mean, you can imagine like a cross of that and then like this Hong Kong, gangster grandmas who like lead triad or syndicates. Like,
Yeah.
I love her. She says, yeah, this very Chinese Hong Kong look. Even my Chinese friends would say, oh, she looks like my tita. So yes, their Chinese blood was very strong. But she had this kind of like, yeah, yes, like Italian, like the matriarch of the family
Yeah.
spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she was incredible. she was such a strong character. I'll be careful. Sabi ko, baka madulas ako. But I'll just say, for a while, my grandfather, actually, both my grandfathers were very stylish men and very, I would say, very soft-spoken men. And for a while, there was a time my grandma would get into trouble because she lived in Florida and California for a while. And of course, coming from Baguio, her ideas about animal rights and all is quite different, I would say. I have to be very careful. And she got into trouble. I was just put it at that way without saying more. Maybe one day I have to write a novel
Okay.
about it. But things she did to snakes and crocodiles and whatnot in Florida got her into trouble. While my grandfather, who was very kind of a suave, both my grandfathers, like three-piece suits, suave, very haciendero style, speaking Spanish to us when we were young, or cussing at us for that matter. So I had that good mix of yin and yang and Dionysius and Apollo and all of that. But yeah, my grandmother, Elisa, really had a lot of influence on me. So even though there were times na parang medyo pro Duterte siya and then anti-Duterte siya or may pagka pro Marcos and all. And that's another thing. I also learned to love people despite political disagreement. So like my grandmother had a very, her idea of leadership was like really strong leader. And there were times I wouldn't have necessarily the same agreement as her, but I was willing to listen and sit down and respectfully disagree with her. And that's one thing I heard. If people want to have an idea of what kind of interaction we had when we had political disagreement, imagine when Mam Dani was next to Trump, right? Like and it kind of things could still work.
I would have loved to meet your grandmother, Richard. She seems like a really remarkable person, and God rest her soul, of course. I'm sure she's somewhere out there still fighting the good fight, or like wishing for you, willing you to keep fighting the good fight for her. I want to turn now to your education. Tell me what education in Baguio City was like. High school, grade school.
So I had a combination of both public school and private school. I also there was at least a year when I went to a very humble public school. It's called the Rojas. So we live in Marcos Highway in a mountainous area. So every day I had to climb and go up there. And last time I checked, it looks like almost all of my uncles and titas, there are like eight or nine of them, also went to the same school. So all of us, we went through those formative years, and it was very humbling. And actually, in that high school, particularly when I was in the public school before I went to private University of Baguio private high school, um, a lot of my classmates were from Cordilleran background, so not Ilocano or Tagalog.
Mm-hmm.
So that also made me very close to the Cordilleran people, whether
Not a
Igorot,
lot of people know
Cancanae,
that about you.
Paloy.
No, but
Yeah,
no,
I
yeah.
didn't talk much, but a lot of my best friends actually from Baguio days and all were like from Cordilleran or Cordilleran Chinese background. My very first partner, girlfriend, I'm not gonna say her name. She was Chinese Igorot, if I'm not mistaken, right? And she was from Benguet, which is outside Baguio. So yeah, there was that's a side of, so I always had this soft spot for my fellow Cordillerans, even though I'm very proud. I love my Ilocano-ness, and Cordillerans always had this very strong I have strong affinity with them because they have this kind of a tough love side to them. Sometimes we would fight or banter and say, "You go home and plant kamote," or something like that. Or my Ilocano sometimes is quite different. It's more Cordilleran influence kind of Ilocano than some of the other Ilocanos. But later on, because I dealt a lot with my grandma, because my grandma would speak only English or Ilocano. Her Tagalog was awful. Like hindi ano ka ba, she will say ano baka or something like that. Like so she would speak like half English and then half Ilocano totally with me. So over time I had to learn Ilocano and also learn to pronounce Ilocano in her way, in a very kind of a rough Ilocosur way. But some of my Ilocano was also influenced by my Cordilleran classmates who have a very different things. And there's something I love about Cordilleran people. They have a very strong sense of dignity, and they don't easily warm up to you like other fellow Filipinos. But when they warm up to you, like they're very, I know this sounds almost stereotypical, but this was at least my experience. But once you get close, they're really there for you. And some of them are still my good friends on Facebook. We keep in touch and all throughout the years. And then later on, I went to private school, and it's just a typical experience you get in the private school and all of that. Yeah.
Do you have memories of early teachers who made an impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, I had so many good teachers. Interestingly, some of the teachers I really like were more in either mathematics or history, right? That's why everyone was wondering if I'll be going into engineering or something like that, or I'll be going to something like a more intellectual or social science and all, right? So whether it's mathematics or history, I had a couple of very, very good teachers back in the day. But I had another traumatic experience I didn't share. So actually during my elementary, there was I was a very proud kid. I was very sensitive. I love my parents a lot. I think someone like made a joke about my parents or something like that, because my dad is not very healthy after it. I don't know if they made a joke about my mom or dad. So me, watching Bruce Lee and all, I went like flying kick to this guy and like
This was
just
before
fighting.
you learned taekwondo.
This was even before I formally learned taekwondo. There was like a year before I officially started taekwondo, right? Or actually, when I just started taekwondo, you're
Mm.
right. So around 9, no? I go like flying kick, and then by just some chance, I hit the guy who's next to the wall, hits the wall, and I break a leg, like
You
like my
break your
leg.
leg?
No, his leg.
Oh,
Leg.
okay.
It was like shocking. Everyone's wondering, like, did I kick him that hard? Next thing you know, there's an ambulance coming, etc. Later on, they figured out there was, parang may osteoporosis, like, osteoporosis for older people. There's
Right.
also some apparently for younger people.
Mm.
So it was just such an unlucky thing that I went crazy like that. The person was next to the wall and it hits the wall and I break a leg. And that was a very traumatic experience, another traumatic experience for me. So one of the things I remember is that many of teachers, hindi naman I was not like teacher's pet, but I was like because I was a good student. I would say a pretty good student. Not the most studious, but pretty good student. And I noticed a lot of them turned a little bit like hostile towards me after that incident. So it took me also some years to recover my standing among
Mm.
teachers and all. So yeah, that's another thing people don't know about. So that's why I'm very careful with physical fights.
Mhm.
So I after that I went all the way to taekwondo, all the way to black belt, and then tried
Yeah.
to learn other martial arts. But as much as possible in real life, I try to avoid fights because one of my first experience of a proper fight was that one, and that one really traumatized me. Because after that, I got bullied a lot.
Yeah.
Like people would come to me, "Oh, you're the Bruce Lee guy. You're the Bruce Lee guy," and then they would like wrestle me down and all of that. So, the typical all boys school kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I
We
can
have that in
definitely
Ateneo.
relate.
We also
Yeah,
have that.
yeah. But now we have to move on to how you became a kind of political analyst, social scientist. And if I'm not mistaken, this really begins when you get to college, right? So, what's college like for you, and how does that lead you down this path of becoming Richard Heydarian?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I'm very thankful to have been in the same universe as people like you. And I mean it, and I'm
Thank
not
you.
saying this. No,
Likewise.
honestly, man,
Yeah.
I was very lucky to get into the intellectual debating world when there were like really a lot of goats around there, and also a lot of new OGs, including you, Leloy. So, I remember the days when I watched all of these top debaters, and I would wonder, like, oh wow, we Filipinos have a lot of smart people.
Mm.
Like saying, like because
So
when it
Richard's
comes
talking about competitive debating. We have a very robust competitive debating circuit in the Philippines for both high school and college.
So I didn't do competitive in high school. I straight went to it when I was in college, and I in UP Diliman. Obviously, our number one competition were you guys,
Mhm.
and initially you guys were the hegemonic power, and then slowly we chipped away at that. And I happened to be also in a very competitive batch. This is the batch of all sorts of different people we don't have to name here, but they're
Yeah,
also
yeah. High
journalists
achieving
or great in
batch. Yeah.
Exactly. So Bibo, we say in Filipino, right? Bibo, like these overachievers.
Yeah.
So we called it the golden batch, and then it
Yeah.
turned out there was people like you in Ateneo, and then there
Yeah.
was like my golden batch, and then there were like super smart people also who were our whether alumni or whether our mentors.
Mm.
And it was an amazing world, Lely. I mean, before I came here to Oxford and all, like someone was telling, oh, Oxford is amazing. You'll sit down there and you'll talk to a physicist, you'll talk to a chemist, you'll talk to this and that. And the back of my head is like, I had that in debate
Mm.
society, right?
Mm.
Because a lot of us came from very different backgrounds. Some of us communication, some of us political science, some of us economics, some of us physics, microbiology. And then
What
one
was
of the
your
things
course when you first entered the debate
I was in
society?
political science. I was in political
Okay.
science,
So
but
you went straight into political science after high
I
school.
was in political science, but you know that the UP Debate Society is in School of Economics, right?
Mm.
So you have a lot of these econ people coming in, but also a lot of my close friends came from, natural sciences background, biology,
Mm.
physics. It's the conversation outside the debates that I found amazing. We would talk about metaphysics, string theory, quantum mechanics. I mean, it was weird. I almost pretentious, I would say, sure. So the things that I see here in Debate Union in Oxford, we had kind of a version of that. So later on, when I would read about the Ilustrados, the brains of the nation, I was so lucky to have those people around me who could debate and discuss almost anything under the sun. I was very, very proud, in retrospect, especially, of being part of that kind of zeitgeist and world. And then when it comes to UP,
Yeah,
I
tell me
mean,
about the university. So Baguio boy, you get to UP Diliman. What's that like?
I was a bratty kid, like good in school, but also bratty.
Mm.
So like it was hard to say I was the black sheep, right? Because I also did my assignment, but I was so bratty. So half jokingly, like people say, "Oh, you should go to PMA, Philippine Military Academy, or West Point," basically, right? Like go and toughen up, be less of a sissy.
Mm.
And the other one's like, "No, go to UP and go with all of those weird activists and intellectuals." And all. Eventually, I went to UP and I said, I want to really do debating and debate society and all of that. But speaking of UP Diliman, it's really a weird place, man. Like you hear these stories of people
I
from
didn't go there, but I grew up on campus.
like stories of first day you go there. There's this artist guy with a parrot on his shoulder. People going there with sleepers. I mean, like teachers like smoking in class, putting it there. Like body shaming. Like the things I saw, like it was like worse than all of these high school movies. Like this, what crazy. That's UP Diliman, and it was like wild, like literally, like you're almost surrounded by jungle. Like all these better dream nowadays. And then you see all of this like sunken garden, stories, urban legends. It was wild.
Did you,
But, you know,
in the sunken garden, right? They used to say like on a, what is this, Saturday morning or Sunday morning, there would be used condoms all over the place.
luckily or unluckily, when I arrived, this was the time they were cleaning things up,
Okay.
literally.
Okay.
Because I think the president of UV by now were all no longer this, Nimenzo, Marxist, open-minded people. It was people from BAA, accounting and
President Roman, if I'm not
something
mistaken,
like that.
right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like this is where the corporate people were taking over. This is the new liberalization of UP. So one of the effects was no more of all of that like hanky-panky business in UP like back in the day. But it was wild. The other thing was, of course, coming from Baguio, you go to the Catholic church almost every day, after class and all that. And then next thing you know, not only people are atheists, they're people who are like anti-religion, like ultra Marxist. So I had to contend also with this like anti-religious people
Mm,
and very for me edgy out there people, which made me realize how socially conservative I was
mm.
in comparison. And then not to mention, I'm not gonna drop names. I remember going to the classes and seeing people, puffing stuff before going to their science classes. I don't know how you do physics, applied physics after that. So many people compare actually UP, Diliman especially, to Berkeley.
Oh, yes, yes.
Um, Very similar kind of culture. Like call it woke, call it like hippie, whatever. We are very, very similar to Berkeley in terms of spirit and also. So that was a culture shock, I'll tell you. So actually, weirdly, Leloy, our world, the debating world, was much closer to what I'm used to, right? Yeah, yeah, we can say it was a bit conyo or like a petit
Mm.
bourgeois and petit bourgeois and all of that, but it kind of insulated me
From
from
the
whatever.
from the UP counterculture.
Counterculture,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So isn't this this is fascinating? Paradoxically, the debating world was the more socially conservative or relatable
Mm,
status quo
mm.
to me than what was out there. So in debating, I found some sort of a grounding and
But
some
in a
sort of
sense, it's also a counterculture, isn't it? There is no other community in the Philippines where you can scream at each other, disagree with each other, and become closer because of it.
no, no, absolutely. It's like embracing chaos, right? Like
Yeah.
when you debate, okay, I'm not gonna say there's something erotic going on there, but it creates that kind of attraction of, like kindred spirit. You're
Mm.
absolutely right. Like the amount of joy and adrenaline rush you would get after like a late night debate on some issue that you're really feeling passionately about, or you had a close fight over. You're right. Those are really among the most amazing days. Absolutely. But also I was lucky because among the professors, and here this is the
Yeah,
other big
yeah.
influence.
This is
I
what
was
I
very
wanted to
lucky.
ask you next.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was very lucky for having great, great professors. And I would intentionally take the tough professors to show I can do it. So I think probably I'm among the only people, probably there are only five people ever who intentionally took more than one courses with Felipe Miranda. So as people know, Felipe
Wow.
Miranda is these are the Chicago boys, right? So they were there during the behavioral science revolution in 1960s, University of Chicago. His professor, I think one of them was one of the founders of international relations theory, etc.
One of the
He fought.
founders of Pulse Asia, right? Felipe
Yeah,
Miranda?
so I'm talking
Yeah.
about Felipe Miranda is essentially one of the founders of both SWS and Pulse Asia. He
Mhm.
co-founded SWS and then he founded Pulse Asia. Very strong personality. Like I'll tell you, man, like he's one of the most strong personalities I've met. I took an additional course with him. Yeah, I kind of got an Uno, so I always had the bragging rights, which is something done very rarely. And he
Yeah.
said, if you Uno my class, you can call me Pepe. So I'm among very few people who could call him Pepe. And then of course, they're like Cynthia Bautista, like so many great professors. And then of course, my mentor, Walden Bellio. I was very lucky to enroll in Walden Bellio's class. Um, I did well, obviously. There you
Yeah.
go, good enough. And next thing you know, Walden wanted me to work for him in the Congress and all of that. Although Walden is like a visiting professor type, right?
Mm.
So there was Julie, who's another very brilliant person, who was now, I think, in Kyoto or something like,
Mm.
who would do the everyday lecture. So I was kind of like Ronald Llamas, this actually the other very famous. So I would come late to the class 30 minutes, and then I had the most question in the class.
Yeah,
Read the readings. It was obvious I didn't read the readings, but I had the most question in the class. The audacity.
so Walden is of course part of, in a sense, part of the UP counterculture. He is a kind of avowed left-winger. So on the one hand, you said you were slightly alienated from the UP counterculture, and yet here you are being attracted to one of the biggest symbols of that UP counterculture. What explains that?
Absolutely. I think the timing and sequence was important. So I was really torn in between the more center-right, conservative, technocratic model of public intellectual that Pepe Miranda represented, whom I highly respected. And then Walden comes in, this swashbuckling, kind of, like a global scholar kind of vibes. And then with his very American posh accent, like, it's like, what? It was like, why does he sound American, right? And he's from Ateneo, apparently, background, and Princeton, and all of that. So he was a breath of fresh air. And I found him, and the very American style, like familiarity. Just call me Walden. Like he would always say, like, don't call me Dr. Belli or Professor Belli. Just call me Walden. And I love that. And then the audacity and all of that. And the fact that I've also felt, this is what one of the big influences he had on me. Don't take yourself too seriously. Take your job seriously. Take
Yeah.
your duty seriously. I got that from Walden because, to be honest, and with due respect to other great mentors I had, I sense they took also themselves very
Mm.
seriously, right? Like if you criticize
Mm.
their ideas, you're criticizing them. With Walden, people can check it until today. Like we openly disagree, including during our talk,
Mm.
and he would never take it. If anything, he would show even more appreciation for you, whether in
Mm.
class, outside class.
Oh, this
So
is
I'm
absolutely true. Yeah.
true, and of course, I really have to credit Walden, even though I was never, still, I would say, never as progressive as him in terms of, in terms of ideological spectrum. He really forced me to rethink a lot of my views on social issues, political issues, and definitely economic and developmental issues, which is very much the crux of what I'm. But I think my difference with him was I always believe in a strong state. There was a very Weberian string to me, or strain to me, that I think was not there to him, because he was always more the civil society guy. I
Mm.
was more always like the strong state working with civil society guy. And also in terms of foreign policy, I always believe in kind of a realist
Mm.
balance of power in ways he didn't. But nevertheless, Walden opened up the whole opportunities for me.
Yeah.
The very first articles I wrote, first books I wrote, he wrote the foreword. He put me in touch with people. There were times that people will ask him to contribute, and then he'll recommend me to write. So
Hmm.
I felt the pressure. But this is where I'm thankful to my grandma. I never got
Yeah.
intimidated, right?
So
So next
Walden
thing you
really
know,
invested in you.
he invested in everyone who worked with him. Whether it's my, well, ex-partner who also worked with him,
I
like
know that
every
story.
anyone who has worked with him, he's like a sun and the rays of the sun. Everyone just feels blessed, and like you're just beaming with not only intellectual brilliance, but really, this kind of public civic engagement, this kind of public intellectual commitment, it's kind of value system that Walden instilled in all of us who were in his orbit. And I felt I was very privileged that, there was someone like him who put me in touch. So that's why a lot of my first writings were actually with very progressive think tanks, including there in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
people in IPS, etc. And then as I developed my own voice, and Walden was always clear, like Richard, if this is your thing, make sure you can make a whole career out of it. So next
Mm.
thing you know, when Foreign Affairs magazine would make a call or New York Times, I would suggest, do you want me to actually write a whole article on that topic? I was that shameless. And then they
Yeah,
would say, okay, send it
I
out,
keep
let's see.
saying that that foreign affairs article very important because that is the first time since Ninoy Aquino that a Filipino had been asked to write an article for Foreign Affairs, the eminent foreign policy journal coming out of the United States. So that was a great achievement, Richard, which actually brings me to, if I may put words in your mouth, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you really learned from Walden was have your feet grounded in the Philippines, have a community, but never be parochial. Always look outside and always compare. I don't think you'll disagree with me when I say you learned that from Walden.
Absolutely. I mean, I work with Walden as his legislative aide on foreign affairs issues, on overseas Filipino workers issues. So very grounded, like helping folks, helping crafting policies. And that's also how I got into writing about South China Sea issue, international relations issue, because I was there in briefings,
Hmm.
very, very first briefings, 2010, 11 on South China Sea disputes from top officials and all. So I started there, but you're right. The thing with Walden was not only this kind of cosmopolitanism, but also this idea of solidarity, transnational solidarity. So
Mm-hmm.
whether it is about solidarity with people in Gaza in 2009 2010, whether it's about solidarity with via campesina and like farmers being oppressed in Latin America, whether it's a solidarity about democracy fighters, heroes in Myanmar.
Even at times when we disagree with Walden, like we weren't as hot, we've never been as hot on like Chavista solidarity, right? The both of us, right? And he was into that. But you can see that that was sincere, that that came from a real spirit of internationalism.
For me, Walden is arguably the most elegant Filipino thinker since Rizal. Thinker, not just writer. Like his writing is great, but I would say Nick Joaquin was also great, right?
Mm.
But like as a thinker, like the range. I remember like working with him in Congress. Like, I know this is about me, but he would go to the congressional hearings, have a debate, and all of that, schmooze with all of these horrible politicians, which I know drained his energy and soul. And then he'll come back and read this thick biography of Weber or the latest, I don't know, Zizek philosophical work. And I said, like,
Yeah, or he would turn on his iPod and listen to you too. This is
yes, yes.
my biggest disagreement with Walden is not actually over Chavismo. It's when he publicly claimed that U2 was superior to the Beatles. It's like that's the most absurd, bizarre statement coming from one of our premier intellectuals.
I think when it comes to that area, he had zero influence on me. I'm a
Okay.
techno guy. It's like, I would listen to like Tiesto, back in the day. Like, and then like do my work, right? So no, we had no probably jazz was the only thing we kind of interface culturally. But as you know, Walden is also from Ilocano background, right? So we would
Mhm.
make all of these jokes about how Ilocanos are overachievers, how we're seen as aggressive and arrogant even sometimes. And we would make all of these local jokes. And I actually accompanied him to his ancestral home. And it's the funny thing between the two of us. I was the one speaking in local Ilocano to
Yeah.
the monster. It's like, who's this guy? We had amazing experience. But I would say, yeah, I was very lucky that there was someone like him there.
Yeah.
But I was not like just waiting to ride on his coattails.
Mm.
Like I said, I will chart my own path. And,
Mm.
eventually I developed not only my voice, but also develop at least my own, I believe, distinct ideas on what a
Yeah.
progressive international thinker should be, which doesn't necessarily align with Walden on a lot of issues,
Yeah.
but we respectfully disagree on those issues.
Yeah. But yeah, I just realized a lot of the things that you're passionate about, including, for example, the South China Sea issue, began when you were a staffer for Walden. And by the way, in case people don't know, the first person to call it the West Philippine Sea, that was Walden Bellio. That he's such a creative
That was
mind.
our office. We
Yeah,
passed a
yeah,
resolution renaming
yeah.
it to West Philippines. He's a patriot, 100%. He's a
Mm.
patriot, 100%. So no one can question his patriotism. but in terms of tactics, right? How do we protect our country? How do we balance? Absolutely, I and Walden are like sometimes on opposite sides of the debate, right?
Yeah.
But having said that, Leloy, Walden said something very nice. Like it's kind of like what my sister also told me when I was young. Like the thing with Walden is that he always said like a great teacher is someone who makes sure the student surpasses the master or something like
Mm,
that.
mm,
So he would like almost consciously say, "I want you to be even greater than me," right? Like
mm,
something like that. I don't
mm.
know, maybe if he meant it that way, but that's how it came to me. And I said, "Wow, not many people have that." And Lela, you know how special that is in the case of the Philippines because we have
Yeah.
a very strong patron-client culture in every aspect of our society. It's not
Yes.
only in politics. Everyone talks
Yes.
about patron-clientelism in politics. No, no, it happens in intellectual life. I have seen so many of my brilliant cohorts, they never went very far because they were just always the assistant to this some senior professor who was good but not as great as Walden.
Mm,
But more
yes.
importantly, never pushed their assistants to be better than them, which was exactly what Walden did to me. He's like your true like kind of like a confused like I mean like this Taoist philosopher, like
Mm.
the great master makes sure the student the protege can surpass them. Of course, I'm not saying I surpassed Walden in any sense of the word, but he imparted that sense to me that you're
Yeah.
not here just copy me or match me. You're here to learn some things from me and then go on and do your own thing.
So, yeah, speaking of going on and doing your own thing, so you stepped out of Walden's congressional office into this wide world, and then you became a political analyst. And I remember those years. I felt like you weren't sleeping, Richard, because every time somebody needed analysis, be it the radio, be it ANC, be it GMA, you were always there and you were weighing in on things. It was like a kind of shock and awe strategy for you to introduce yourself to the public and make sure your voice was recognized.
Again, this is where my grandma came in, like this kind of go grand, like go get it, like and like totally, like unabashed, absolutely. I always felt if you work really hard and you earned it, you know, there's nothing to be ashamed about it. So one of the things I pick up from Walden was the love for writing. So once I stopped debating, I had to go into something else, and writing was my way. I don't know, probably there I have probably surpassed Walden, probably 2 or 3 thousand articles I've written, right? Uh, and the other thing was like, okay, writing has its own audience, especially if you write for, I don't know, New York Times Foreign Affairs, you get a certain, but when you're on TV and all, you reach another audience. And then it's the cumulative effect that could put you in a position to actually influence things in
Right.
ways that you would not have been able to if you were just a typical great academic, which I have
Mm.
100% respect for, right? Or a typical journalist,
Yes,
which I
and
have,
you are
whatever.
always pushing. To be fair, this is not something that Richard just does for himself. He's always pushing his friends to do the same thing. So I would be half as public as I am right now if not for this guy here. So, he puts his money where his mouth is. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. And again, I was also very lucky to have friends like, vloggers like Mark Gamboa who
Mm,
pushed me also to go into vlogging. But, so my idea was I would read about Rizal and that generation and how like profound their ideas about every single dimension of society was. And then I would look at the state of policy debate in the Philippines and I felt like, how did we get here from there? Right.
mm.
And I always felt frustrated. I also saw how academics were ignored or mocked by mainstream media because like when you interview academics they go into technical jargons and it takes them forever to explain one idea and thanks to debating I learned to squeeze so much into 1 minute,
Brevity,
not
yes.
speak very
Because
fast.
our speeches were 7 minutes and you had to get everything in.
That's where the debating skills came in. Once you start writing for international, Western media, and flagship newspapers and all, they really force you to compress 2 paragraphs into 3 sentences. So that concision, I was able to translate it into like talking on TV, etc. And by the way, one thing I didn't say, and this is where my father had huge influence on me. So my dad always wanted me to be very internationally competitive from very early on. So when I was like 6 or 7 years old, he would make me listen to BBC every single day. Father didn't realize was that I was falling in love with the content of what I was hearing about geopolitics. So when I was like 9, 10 years old, I already knew about the history of JVC, right? Like I don't know if people even know those companies from Japan once upon a time. Daewoo, right? I was obsessed about Gulf War and balance of power in the Middle East. So and then in my teenagers, I would watch Hard Talk
Mm.
almost every like as so So once I got a chance to be actually on those channels that I used to watch when I was a kid as an inspiration to see like, wow, what's happening in the world, I said, I'm not gonna lose the chance. And then, but interestingly, I was first discovered abroad before I was interviewed in the Philippines.
Mm.
So way before the ANCs and Karen Davilas reached out to me, I was first being interviewed internationally. I said,
Bye.
who's this guy? Pinoy pala yan. And then, oh, nasa Lasal pala, ganun,
Who
ganun.
was
But
interviewing you?
yeah, so, early on, I was already doing Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC,
Aha.
etc. And then the Philippine media noticed me. And then, 2015, 16, I went all in. And it also helped that I got some, predictions right here and there. I mean,
Yeah.
they realized like whether it's about how far ISIS would go. Remember 2013, 14, people were panicking ISIS will take over, whether something's about war in the West Philippine Sea and where the arbitration award would go. So people realized maybe this guy is not just a
Yes.
sweet talker. Maybe he knows his stuff. And then I would produce, this is like every 2 or 3 years I had to produce a new book, like
Mm.
a proper book, to solidify my idea. So all of those things went together, hand in hand. But of course, I always look up also to people like Farid Zakaria, who were able to, again, I may disagree with him ideologically and all of that. I felt he's too liberal for my taste, but in terms of he has this kind of academic understanding of politics, and then the way he translates it for mainstream audience. So I was also very much inspired by that. So yeah, I felt you can wear different hats, and in a way that's also from my philosophy in martial arts,
Mm-hmm.
right? So as soon as I finished taekwondo, I was looking for another sports where I can improve other areas because I
Mm-hmm.
know you cannot just rely on one thing. So in the same way that I try to combine academic world,
Mm-hmm.
journalism, and
Mm.
increasingly now, of course, nowadays public advocacy and podcasting and all. I was also the same thing in terms of martial arts. Like you do taekwondo, then boxing, then Muay Thai, then jiu-jitsu,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So I was very
I'm
Bruce
gonna
Lee.
take
Like,
you up on that jujitsu commitment, by the way. I really need to
I
see you
feel
in the
bad.
mats at one point, right? And I hope to grapple with you someday, Richard. Because we are
That,
getting old. We are
that
getting
sounds weird, but yeah, let's
yeah, we
go.
but we because man, we are getting older, and the older you get, the striking arts are not as kind to your joints as grappling, right? So the moment we hit our 50s, if you want to keep practicing martial arts, you need to get acquainted with the floor, with the mat. Um,
Absolutely. And it's a very cerebral
yeah,
martial art, which I
yeah.
love about it.
So I'm gonna take you up on that. But actually, so this idea of self-expansion, right? You're always pushing boundaries. You're always figuring out what next. And your big what next after your column on the Inquirer, your appearances internationally, your constant presence on Philippine media. Your next big step was really to become a kind of vlogger type personality. And when you were doing that, you said like this is me cultivating a new voice. And it was very clear to me that it was a new voice for you. As you said, like the bardagulan, balahura, kind of more informal manner of the podcast was initially not very congenial to you. That was a voice that you had to develop. And now you've developed it fully. But tell me about how you developed that voice because it was not natural for you. And I know this about you.
Yeah, there was a lot of behind the scenes preparations and psychological reorientation going on to the. I mean, like one of the things with us Ilocano is that before we buy something expensive, we really think deeply about it and make 10 different comparisons. So if it's an expensive fancy car or it's it's like it takes me 3 or 4 months before I make decisions on anything that is fancy, right? So in a way it's the same thing here. Like I remember friends were saying, it's like, okay, you're doing all of this media thing, but you're not building your own thing, right? You're like a resident analyst for this media and that. And then once you're done with that, that's it. They own proprietary everything, right?
Yeah.
What is your own thing? And I'll say a lot of the reason why I became very proactive in terms of my public intervention was this is the Duterte era where there's basically information warfare. And I realized I saw the tectonic shifts, how the audience, the electorate was getting more and more attracted no longer to this like this squeaky clean necktie guys or this posh experts on TV, but they like these people who were like speaking their language a la Duterte, right? In a vlog. I mean, and I would watch the vlog of some of these really problematic people. It's like,
Yeah.
why are people even watching these people? Like, yeah, I know some of it is bots, some of it is artificially inflated, but you could see in the comment section there was some organic attraction to that. There was what we call parasociality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like people develop that kind of almost affinity with these people. And I said, you see, that's the weakness of us who work in the mainstream media and also in the academic world. Like we're great among them when we do workshops or when we do like I don't know 2 minute analysis of something, But I think people wanted something that they can relate to, something they can listen to almost every single day. So I came up with my own version of a kind of a daily. If there's a NAS daily, I had to come up with my own version of daily. But the very first one was very hard. The first vlog I had to do live vlog, meaning that's it. There's no going back. People are gonna screenshot stuff or something. You get it wrong. But in a way, I chose the right time, and I was already in the right frame of mind by this time because it's pandemic, so you have a lot of time to meditate. I do meditation.
Right.
I have Sabbath day. There's a spirituality behind it. So, um, and the first one was right after Lenny, I think, decided when Lenny decided to run for presidency.
Mm.
So there wasn't a wave, and then I said, you know what? Enough of me going on TV and doing like this. I'm just gonna go live. It's like, hey guys, come on, like like really vlogger, and the response was crazy. I mean, I remember, and those were the days where the algorithm of Facebook was more friendly to politics before it went crazy. There were days I would do millions of views with just two or three videos, and like the videos were like 1 hour long or 2 hours long. It was wild. So I was very lucky because it was really at the Goldilocks
Mm.
moment when I made
Mm.
that and the responses. Because, Lele, I was being trolled almost every day during
Mm.
the Duterte era. I would get death threats. I would get this like horrible texts and messages. So a part of me is wondering, like, if I go live, what are they gonna, like, how are they, if they're gonna do to me what they did to others? Of course, one of the cases was my very good friend, God bless his soul. Um, Carlos Celdran, right? Who is again one of the great figures who had also a lot of influence on me. My friendship with Carlos Celdran is something I didn't talk about as much, but he had a huge influence on me. We became very good friends in the mid Duterte era, 2017, 18, 19, before his passing. Very premature passing, tragic passing. We talked about culture, history, and he told me about his horrible experience when, remember, he endorsed Mar Rojas in 2016 elections against Duterte, and then like every day, everyone would swarm his account and all of that. So I was very determined, Leloy, that I will not be shut down. And I'll continue the good fight that Carlos Celdran and all started, basically, this kind of a publicly accessible kind of intellectualism that Carlos Celdran brought. For him, it's history and culture. For me, it was more politics, economic, developmental analysis, and foreign policy. So that's why I was very aggressive, like literally live, right? If there's a troll or something, I'll call out the troll. How dare you? And then I would see my followers would also like troll the troll. And then it kind of became a kind of it's a model that iteratively worked. Like I realized, oh wow, so if you fight, people will fight for you. So now you go to my page, troll me, wait 1 minute, the comment section, that person will be demolished. Now, I'm not saying I welcome that. I'm just saying I had to create a cordon sanitaire. And I had to make people feel safe to fight the good fight in social media where it's wild. And here I would say, Lelo, my ultimate idol is Socrates. Like he would go into the middle of the agora and bardagulan with anyone and then come out, use humor. I mean, Socrates said you have to seduce people into truth, right? And that really stuck with me, really stuck with me. And I said, yeah, like do whatever seduction, like humor, crazy stuff, booyakasha, like. So I knew it was not. I'll tell you honestly, like Lelo, many people warned me that's gonna ruin your brand, Richard. Right? You're like the guy on BBC and CNN. Oh, you're on New York Times Foreign Affairs. You have books. This is cheapening you. What is this heaf huff you're doing, right? Because I was wearing like football shirts, whatever. I didn't care, Lelo. I said no. This is what pioneers experience. No one believes them, but I felt it was the moment for us to do something like that. But lastly, on this point, I was already seeing versions of that in the US and other places, whereby this kind of, like professors doing vlogging and all works, right? So why not in the Philippines? So in a way, I was also inspired by already successful examples, although a lot of them turned out maga and weird later on. But in terms of the business model works,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So I was very lucky for that. And then people also don't forget. I even publicly debated one of the big propagandists of Duterte back in 2019. We don't have to go into the details, not worth it because it was not really a debate. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But that made me confidence like, oh, I can walk into a hall of all pro Duterte people and get out alive and well. Right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
so like all our friends hated me for doing that because, oh, you're platforming them and all of that. But for me, it's like, actually, I feel like, some of these soft pro Duterte people were saying, this guy's not as unreasonable as he's actually nice. And then they would come to me and say, sir, actually, nice idea. You were right. So I don't, it came in organically, but at the same time, there was also an element of timing. I chose exactly when Lenny decided to run for presidency because I knew Vice President Lenny took a lot of risk when she decided to run for the presidency. And in a way, I was also inspired for that. I said, this is time for us to take risk and push the boundaries.
So, Richard, we're just about at time, and I want to start a tradition for this podcast. And I just thought of it now. I think I'll do it for every other for every guest, which is tell me three cultural artifacts that explain you, Richard Heydarian. So it could be a book, piece of music, a movie, whatever. Three cultural artifacts that help explain you.
That's an I thought you will go Ezra Klein and say three books and all.
Yeah, it's
Like all
kind of
my
inspired by Ezra Klein, but I want to broaden it. And I want it to be
cultural
more
fact.
autobiographical
Mm.
because Ezra's is like, what you should read right now to
Yeah,
keep updated, right? But I want
it's something
three
cultural.
artifacts that are close to you, to your heart.
Probably, I mean, obviously, there was always this kind of the Ilustrado image that I always looked up to. So Rizal is obviously there in every sense of the word, whether it's his life, whether it's his works and all of that. In terms of literature, I was very attracted to Fitzgerald's literature. I literally have his like biography, like Fool for Love and all of that. People like the jazz age had a lot of influence on my idea of what is style.
Okay, I'm gonna read you in here. So three books, three albums. Be very specific.
And well, in terms of a cultural icon, Tom Ford. I love Tom Ford. He's amazing. I don't know if
Okay.
people have watched Tom Ford analyzing fashion issues and all of that. I love Tom Ford, including his perfume and all of that. Is that biographical enough,
Okay,
right?
okay. So let's say
Oh yeah.
Tom Ford's Perfume, the biography of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Okay, one more.
And the jazz age, the whole jazz age
Be
thing,
very
yeah.
specific. Be very specific.
The whole Saint Tropez, like the whole Southern France, those kind of novels, and sceneries. That's why very attractive din sa akin yung the talented Mr. Ripley, right? Like
Oh,
this kind
okay.
of
Okay, so that's the third
this kind of
artifact.
like
Okay.
a
Okay.
aestheticized but kind of bardagulan, scary stuff. Like I love it. So it's cultural, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
So
yeah.
that's perfect. That's what I wanted to hear.
I'm into
That's great.
cars too,
Yeah.
but I won't say much about cars. Baka it will be
Okay.
weaponized against me. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
yeah.
into sports cars and all too. Yeah.
Yeah. That was great, Richard. Thank you very much. I couldn't have thought of a better guest for the show than you because there is really a kind of narrative arc to your life that I think is inspiring for anybody who wants to get involved in public affairs. And to me, the lesson I learned here is just keep pushing your boundaries. You may think that the way you engage the public is something extremely narrow, like, writing articles, but then you realize that you can actually do more and you can cultivate new voices. I'm telling you, like I've known Richard for what, maybe 20 years now, and I wouldn't have thought that he would be this great blogger. I thought he was a kind of prim and proper academic slash public commentator
I
who
am. I still am. How dare
yeah, but I
you?
didn't know that he would be able to cultivate this voice that would turn him into the kind of most prominent podcaster, a political podcaster in the Philippines. And that annoys some people, but even if it annoys people, it pushes the boundary of public discourse. And for that, I'm so thankful for Richard and Darren for doing what you do. So as a Filipino, I'm thankful for for you doing what you do. And as a friend, I thank you for pushing my own boundaries and making sure my voice is in public. Thank you very much, Richard.